Warnings of a dire humanitarian crisis in the Democratic Republic of Congo. The UN says 25 million people urgently need assistance. The decades-long conflict has taken its toll on civilians. But is enough being done to end it? And what role do regional players have? This is Inside Story. Hello and welcome to the program. I'm Mohammed Jamjoom. For years, the Democratic Republic of Congo has been trapped in a cycle of conflict with devastating consequences for its people. The latest escalation in violence between the military and M23 armed group has forced 7.4 million people from their homes in 2 years. The United Nations says more than 25 million people are in desperate need of aid. And it's warned the latest M23 activity in the East carries the very real risk of provoking a wider regional conflict. What will it take to bring peace to the DRC? And is there a role its neighbors can play to prevent the violence from spreading? We'll delve deeper into the topic shortly, but first, this report by Axel Zajmovic.
This is Butembo, a commercial hub in the Eastern Democratic Republic of Congo. People here say they live in fear as battles between the army and M23 fighters have intensified. Recently, the armed group captured the nearby Lubero town. Thousands fled.
What is happening now in Butembo is very worrying, and people are leaving in real panic. This is all because of what is going on in the territory of Lubero, where rebels are advancing towards our city. But we cannot continue to see people killed because of their identity or for lack of ID. This is too much and must stop.
More than 120 rebel groups operate in the eastern DRC, fighting for control over land and natural resources. The most prominent is the M23, ethnic Tutsi fighters based in North Kivu province. This conflict began 2 years ago. The armed group accuses the government of failing to protect it from Hutu rebels, who fled Rwanda after the genocide in 1994 and settled in the eastern DRC. But the government blames neighboring Rwanda, saying its support for the M23 has led to the increase in violence.
We are faced with an influx and an aggression from our neighboring country, Rwanda, that has sent over 4,000 troops, that have fueled a massive displacement crisis in eastern DRC.
The UN estimates 7.4 million people have been forced from their homes, 2.8 million in North Kivu alone. It also says the DRC has the highest number of people in need of humanitarian aid in the world.
About 40% of the population, that is 40.8 million people, just the sheer size of it, face serious food shortages, with 15.7 million facing severe food insecurity, and as a result, a higher risk of malnutrition and infectious diseases directly related to that. If immediate action is not taken to address basic needs in DRC, over 1 million children will suffer from acute malnutrition.
Families seek shelter in overcrowded and under-resourced displacement camps. Water and sanitation systems cannot handle the influx. Outbreaks of cholera, measles, and plague have been reported, exacerbated by flash flooding and landslides. The volatile situation prevents humanitarian agencies from reaching those in need. A 2-week truce announced by the United States earlier this month collapsed within days. Both sides are accused of violations. And now the UN warns if the conflict in the eastern DRC isn't resolved soon, it could lead to a wider regional war. Axel Zajmovic, Al Jazeera, for Inside Story.
All right, let's go ahead and bring in our guests. From Goma in the Eastern Democratic Republic of Congo, we're joined by Emilie Katondolo, a peace activist who advocates for the rights of women. She grew up in the area at the center of the conflict. In Kinshasa is Greg Ramm, the DRC country director for Save the Children. He's written extensively about the impact of the current violence on children. And in Cape Town, South Africa, Crystal Orderson is a journalist for the Africa Report, a quarterly magazine that focuses on African politics and economics. She spent a decade reporting from conflict zones on the continent. A warm welcome to you all, and thanks so much for joining us today on Inside Story. Emilie, I want to start with you today. We're talking about the humanitarian situation in the DRC, and I want to go to you first because you were born in Goma, you grew up there. I read where you have said that you've never known peace. So I want to ask you, how dire is the situation there? How hard has life been for you, for your loved ones, and for other members of the population?
Thank you. As you said, I'm a Congolese, born and grew up in Goma, the eastern part of the DRC. I've never seen peace. I've never known peace. Today, I'm 31 years old, and I grew up knowing that I can't walk beyond 9 p.m. for fear of being killed or raped. And this really affects me personally as a young woman activist and defender of women's rights, because I find myself unable to meet the needs of others, especially the young girls in the camp who are selling their bodies to survive, and it's called survival sex. All I can do is to make them aware that they have rights, and also telling them about the hygiene or also the consequences of prostitution.
Greg, the World Health Organization says that more than 25 million people are in desperate need of aid in the DRC, and that more than 1 million children there are teetering on the brink of acute malnutrition. I wonder if you could just give our viewers a snapshot from your point of view as to how dire the situation has gotten.
Well, the statistics are accurate, and the situation is truly dire. 7.4 million people are displaced from their homes, fleeing conflict, more than half of them children. I was recently visiting the camps outside of Goma, and you see children sleeping on basically bare lava with a bit of sheeting, a tent, not enough to eat, not enough water, out of school, desperate need of healthcare. People need the assistance, they need peace, and they need humanitarian assistance to help with basic survival.
Crystal, I wonder if you could also sort of help us understand just how bad the situation has gotten when it comes to the violence. How volatile have things gotten? How much has fighting escalated between the Congolese army and M23 fighters?
I think this is a silent genocide. We've been talking about it for the past 2 years, and as my colleagues pointed out, the absolute dire situation on the ground. And I think in South Africa, it's especially become a big issue because there's thousands of South African troops now fighting in the north, fighting alongside the Congolese army against M23. So it's become quite a local issue because there's, of course, daily reports coming from Congo that South African soldiers are dying. We do see that we have a new cabinet with new ministers, including defense minister and a deputy that is actually a former military general. So domestically, there's a big push and the humanitarian crisis unfolding. There is, of course, a major concern. And I think there's a renewed political push, at least from South Africa, given that it's contributed the most troops to that SADC mission in the DRC, that there's a real push for a political peace process to happen. And in fact, in the coming days, this new Minister of Defense will be heading to Zambia, where SADC, the political organ, will be meeting. And I think there is, of course, the situation in the DRC will be one of the main agenda points being discussed by those ministers. But I don't think one can take away the absolute humanitarian disaster happening. And I think the impatience on the ground for the leaders to actually find a peaceful solution. And I think people, of course, are impatient because I think when we talk again later in the week, those statistics would have increased because every day we're hearing reports of the dire situation on the ground.
Emilie, I want to come back to you, and I want to thank you for sharing your personal story because it helps our viewers sort of get beyond the headlines of this story and really look at it, from a more human perspective. You've also written that you believe that the most effective way to empower women in North Kivu, in the DRC, is to transform their lives through economic independence. And I want to ask you how difficult that mission is, and how is one able to do that given the current climate?
Thank you. This part of the humanitarian aid, the specific needs of women displaced are not taken into account, and their hygiene, dignity kits are not sufficient. So we tried to help them to help them to know how to do something so that they can cater for their thing, to do small businesses, and also to just to initiate them to work that we have in our center, because we have a center just near the camp of Bulengo, and we selected 100 women who are very, very in a critical situation. We initiate them to some economic work, and that's really helped them because they have joined a group of credits where they can earn credits and also go and buy something, sell them, and come again to pay that credit and get another amount. We are trying to initiate women to different activities that we have, like sewing, like cultivating some plants, some vegetable that they can eat, and they can keep apart, that they can go and sell and get something just to cater for their things, for their needs every day. Because the situation is very bad in the camp, and women are really suffering. The only way that we can help them to not be being raped when they go to fetch for something to eat, we can keep them in our center and help them to do something that can help them every day.
Greg, you heard Emilie there talk about the dire situation in the camps, and I want to ask you a little bit more about that. I want to talk specifically about the ripple effects of all of this. If the already catastrophic situation in the DRC is leading to further mass displacements, doesn't that only overwhelm water systems, sanitation systems that are already stressed in these camps and in areas where the displaced go? And then doesn't that lead to outbreaks of diseases like cholera? I mean, how much worse is the situation getting?
But the situation is getting worse, and you're right that displacement does have multiple effects. For example, recent displacement has gone into the area of Minova, in the northern part of South Kivu. Schools that were recently in use have now been emptied to house displaced people. So not only are the children who have been displaced out of school, but the children who were studying in those schools in Minova are also out of school. It overwhelms water, sanitation systems. As you met, there's not enough food to go around. And it also leads to conflict and violence. So not only do we have the violence and the challenges of armed groups, the many armed groups that your piece spoke about, men with guns running around Goma and other places, robbery and others, but also just the pressure on families of living in the circumstances that you're seeing here. The effects of displacement, of having 7 million people not living in their homes, but living in these crowded and overwhelming conditions, is difficult for everybody, for children, for their families, and we must find a solution to this crisis.
Crystal, a minute ago you were talking about SADC. That's the Southern African Development Community, and there is this SADC mission that's a peacekeeping mission in the DRC led by South Africa. I want to ask you if that has done anything to improve the situation, or if there is the prospect of it helping to de-escalate the tensions in DRC.
So there's close to 5,000 troops. South Africa, Tanzania, and Malawi make up this SADC troop deployment. They've been in the country since December. They only have a one-year mandate. So what we find is that it's a peacekeeping mission, and this new Deputy Minister of Defense, who is very proactive, and he's only been in office for 1 week, already said that firstly, the mandate of the troops perhaps need to change from a peacekeeping mission to actually taking on the M23 rebels and other armed groups. But I think at the moment they are really struggling. They are ill-equipped. They don't have the facilities that they need to actually to fight the M23 rebels and other armed groups. And so I think, unfortunately, we've not seen a success of this troop deployment. And here in South Africa, it's becoming quite a big political issue because close to 10 South African soldiers have already died since their deployment in December. And domestically, there's, of course, questions being asked about the role of the troops. However, the South African authorities remain steadfast that as part of a regional bloc, and South Africa being the biggest economy in SADC, they have to contribute to peace building. I also think that South Africa believes they have a line to President Felix Tshisekedi to actually bringing to a table to start negotiating with Paul Kagame. So that's what the South African officials are hoping for. I think on the ground, and I think in the Congo and in Rwanda, my sense is that's not going to happen anytime soon.
Emilie, from your vantage point, what immediate steps need to be taken to address the basic needs of those most affected by the conflict?
The really basic needs that the women want in the camp, they really want to their hygiene, their dignity kits to be available, because most of them, they were going through different disease because of not having enough water or enough something to respond to their specific needs. And also they really need an assistance in their needs, in primary needs, because when they go to the field, they go because they have to feed their children. And if they don't have that something to eat, that something for their hygiene, they are now like candidates of different AIDS, or as also they are victims of sexual violence. What they need is to be able to get something to eat, and also for their specific needs.
Greg, I want to talk for a minute about another aspect in this crisis. Save the Children reported in March that the spike in violence in the North Kivu region had forced 540 schools to close in the past year. How chaotic does that make the situation for children? How much does it increase the risk that they could be recruited by armed forces or forced into work?
All of that robs children of their childhood, and just, and risks a whole generation growing up without knowing what school is, without knowing what peace is, as Emilie has spoken about so poignantly. So what is needed is an end to the fighting, an end to the conflict. We are in the midst of a 2-week humanitarian ceasefire. It's not perfect, but it is holding. Conflict is down. That needs to be extended. Civilians need to be protected, whether those are schools or health clinics or simply the camps where people are living. Right now, fighting is taking place in and around the camps. Schools are attacked. Health clinics are attacked. That needs to stop. Whatever fighting is going on, civilians, children, families, people fleeing for their lives should not be further attacked. And finally, more resources are needed. If a school is displaced, assistance is needed. If healthcare facilities are attacked, that healthcare is needed, food and water. And as a statistic you showed just a few minutes ago shows, the current humanitarian response is deeply underfunding. Congo is often far from the headlines. We appreciate the coverage that Al Jazeera is giving to this crisis, but much, much more needs to be done.
Greg, let me just follow up on a point you just made, talking about how difficult it's been to actually get the funding you need. There was a $2.6 billion funding plan for DRC. I've read that that's only about 26% funded, according to the UN. Why is that? If it's such a dire crisis, why is it so difficult to get the kind of funds that organizations need in order to get so much needed aid to the population?
I think there's two big reasons. First, globally, there are so many humanitarian crises. You'd say the world is on fire, and every place you look, in every region of the world, there's crises, there's humanitarian needs. But unfortunately, some crises are better funded than others. And every Ukrainian child who is fleeing that crisis, every Ukrainian refugee needs all the assistance and deserves all the assistance they can get. But so do the children of Africa, so do the children of Congo. And unfortunately, we find that the world does not allocate resources fairly, purely based on humanitarian need. There's too much politics in it, and we need to take politics out of humanitarian assistance and ensure that that goes where it's needed most, starting in the camps and displaced camps of the Congo, where there is not enough resources to meet basic human need.
Crystal, you were speaking earlier about how it didn't seem like, the prospects looked very good when it comes to trying to de-escalate things. There was a 2-week truce that had been announced by the U.S. earlier this month, but that collapsed within days. What needs to happen, and who could play a productive role in trying to de-escalate things?
I think we have to talk about Rwanda, we have to talk about the Congolese government, because we can't just have aid organizations, and as much as they're doing incredible work, there also needs to be some level of accountability from the Congolese government. So we do now see President Felix Tshisekedi, he has his cabinet in place for, at least from a SADC point of view, they want a stable Congo with a government that has the mandate of its people. And of course, we know that as much as Rwanda has eased and continued to deny the support of the M23 rebels, we saw with the recent UN expert panel report, again pointing fingers at Rwanda, also at other regional actors and countries. And so what I think is needed, and at least what we gather from South African officials, you need a political settlement. You need Tshisekedi and Kagame around a table to start talking about the real situation on the ground and to bring about peace. It has happened before. In 2012, we had mediation efforts also led by South Africa that actually ensured that the conflict had ended. South Africa is hoping they can do the same, but it's 12 years later. Geopolitically, the world is fundamentally changed. I think also the East being so mineral rich, there's so many players and actors involved in extracting resources and making money off it at the expense of people that are dying and being displaced. But I think this week it is going to be interesting to watch the SADC political leaders meeting in Zambia to discuss the DRC. And I think one cannot ignore the importance of a regional body and getting leaders to actually talk about this and pushing for a political situation. And I do think South Africa at least will be upping the pressure, at least on President Felix Tshisekedi, to actually start talking about peace. But, that is what one is hoping for.
Crystal, let me also just ask you about something you just made mention of. How much have mineral resources been a factor in this protracted crisis and conflict?
It's been a big factor. I mean, the East is one of the richest regions in Africa, and the global demand for EV cars, etc., means that the resources in the East is needed. And I do think that is a big player. And we heard from Congolese authorities giving us amounts of the extraction of the amount of resources that have left the country illegally. And I do think that plays a role in fueling the conflict. We know that M23 and the way it's armed, it's very sophisticated. That is coming from somewhere. Compare the ill-equipped SADC mission that is there. And I think we cannot take the fact that the East is so rich off the table and how that is also fueling the conflict.
Emilie, I know that your work is focused on helping women and empowering women. And I want to ask you about the fact that you've written that Congolese women have always been marginalized from the decision-making processes that dictate their freedoms. How difficult, or how much more difficult, has that made the situation for them?
In Congo, women are really excluded from for negotiation or dialogue, which is about peace. And we have been mobilizing other women to reach that decision post that they can speak for themselves, and also they can contribute for restoring peace in our country. And we recently mobilized other women to go to participate to the third dialogue of Nairobi, and women were there, but they were not accredited. They were just outside. They can't sit on the table to speak for themselves, to express their need, or also to give their ideas for the restoration of the peace. So that is really pushing us again to continue sensitize women, to also inform them about their rights, and also to be part of the process, because they can't speak about the specific need of women without them speaking for themselves. That is our work. We continue to push hard so that we can also start sitting on the table and talk about our real problem, and also to give our contribution to the restoring of the peace.
All right. Well, we have run out of time, so we're going to have to leave the conversation there today. Thanks so much to our guests, Emilie Katondolo, Greg Ramm, and Crystal Orderson. And thank you, too, for watching. You can see the program again anytime by visiting our website, aljazeera.com. And for further discussion, go to our Facebook page. That's facebook.com/AJ Inside Story. You can also join the conversation on X. Our handle is @AJ Inside Story. From me, Mohammed Jamjoom, and the whole team here, bye for now. Make sure to subscribe to our channel to get the latest news from Al Jazeera.